Okay, today's video is broken down into 5 parts exploring staff stories of Edinburgh Festival Fringes, the first dealing with sea venues, the next with one specific incident at sea venues, the third talks about the pleasance, the fourth we look at some of the responses given to the press by these organisations, and finally we will explore the response given by the Fringe Society this week in the stage about the calls for better working conditions. So, let's kick off with sea venues, or as I will call them, crap venues. First up, hi Rosie, I really appreciated your thread on sea venues. I'm DMing as I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say publicly, as I ended up suing them for maltreatment after I worked there. Okay, we can't share that story. How about another? I'm DMing you because I took sea venues to small claims court. Okay, so I can't share that one either. Let's try another. I can't share this online because I sued them for how they treated me when I volunteered there. That's right, I have heard from not 1, not 2, but 3 people who have taken sea venues to small claims courts over bad working practices, but luckily for us there are tens of other stories which I am able to share from staff and volunteers who haven't done that. This one says, I have some stuff I could share, but probably most interestingly, in 2018 I complained so hard at sea venues that I think they were worried I'd actually sue for malpractice, so they gave me almost £800 in goodwill money. I'm surprised the stress of working with them didn't give me a stroke. Another reads, 13-hour days? Ha! We would have been lucky to work for 13 hours in a day when I was at sea venues. By the end, when we were expected to deinstall the theatres, and I am not a techie, I was volunteering front of house. Of course I dropped scaffolding on myself and had to be taken to hospital, where the doctor told me he had seen 2 other sea venue staff members that day. Finally, an email I received read, I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a basement flat with 5 other young women. The impacts of working 15-hour days with just a day off and no real food in the flat, I think has impacted my mental and physical health ever since I volunteered. All of this is incredibly shocking, but I'm going to move on to talk about one story I received in particular about crap venues, and it comes with a trigger warning to do with sexual assault. So please, if this is something that may be distressing, disturbing or triggering, disengage now and watch part 3 of the video where we discuss the bad practices of the pleasance. This story arrived in my email inbox from a young woman who I will call Sam. She worked at sea venues in 2018 when she was just 19 years old, trying to get some experience of the theatre industry. Sam had never been to Edinburgh before and was excited to experience the festival. Sam talked about, like other stories I've shared, of sleeping on the floor on a mattress in a room with other women. However, in the flat there were also men, one of whom I will call Ben, would come and try to tuck the girls in at night. Sam said she was never made to feel welcome by the other women because she is a bit weird. Hey, me too, Sam. And they developed an unofficial buddy system for walking back from the venue, and Sam would often be paired with Ben. He regularly tried to kiss and hug me on the way home. I just didn't know what to do. Sam spoke to a venue manager about Ben, but because Ben was well liked and regularly volunteered, the manager shrugged it off and said Sam just needed to be harsher. And of course, as the month went on, things got worse and worse until Sam took her only day off, exhausted, just lying in her sleeping bag on the mattress on the floor. Ben knew she was alone in the room, and he sexually assaulted her. The following day they were working at the same time, but Sam said she wasn't feeling well. But as punishment for not going to her rotated shift, Sam's roommates hid all the food in the flat, so Sam had nothing to eat. Sam says, I just called my mum and she came and picked me up. I don't know if I've ever really gotten over what happened that summer. I cannot stress this enough, but if your volunteering system in any way has allowed for a young woman or any person to be assaulted, you need to shut it down and start again. Okay, so we're going to move on from crap venues. Let's have a dig around some of the stories I've been sent of the pleasance, or as I will call it, the unpleasance. I've had lots of emails and Twitter DMs. First up, a huge email arrived, and I'm going to chop it up a little bit, but it reads, I worked as a volunteer press officer at the Pleasance during Fringe 2019. To my knowledge, the press office had the longest shifts of all. The office was open 7 days a week from 9 AM until 7 PM, and the 7 volunteers were all expected to be in for the full 10 hours every day, from 26th July to 29th of August. We were given 1 day off across the entire festival. The team running the press office worked on an inbox zero basis, meaning we couldn't leave until every email in the inbox had been replied to. We often stayed much later. I would guess the average number of hours I worked per week was 75 to 80. Considering we were all there in a volunteering capacity, the atmosphere was brutal. I had sleepless nights over emails I had sent that hadn't been formatted quite right. One of the other volunteers had a falling out with the head of press and was pulled in for what I can only describe as a disciplinary meeting with the general manager of the Pleasance. Another was made to feel awful because he took a day off with illness. The aspect I found most concerning was the get out at the end, where all volunteers were expected to do manual labour taking down the sets. The volunteers were all late teens, early 20s, and had no minimal safety training and next to no supervision whilst moving heavy pieces of set around. Groups of young people wearing no helmets and no steel cap boots were dangling over the sides of the balcony to slide huge pieces of wood down to the team on the ground floor to catch because they couldn't physically fit them down the spiral staircase. Given most of the people doing the get-out had been working 10-hour days without a day off for weeks, I felt that the level of tiredness was bound to cause an accident. Here's a DM about the unpleasance. I worked on Pleasance 2017 and it was anything other than pleasant. Working every single day, hardly any breaks, you had one day off during the whole 4 weeks, pay was shit, managers treated you like slaves, I had major burnout and my mental health wasn't great. Another, I worked as technical staff at Pleasance, 35 days, 10 to 12 hours each, staying in dingy uni accommodation with camp beds. And finally, a long message. I volunteered in PR for the Pleasance and was bullied continuously by managers and paid staff. I remember sitting, crying on the last day of helping people dismantle the theatre, wearing ballet pumps with a nail sticking through my foot, being told that I had to find my own way to the hospital and that it was my fault this had happened. I was only 20. I hope other people don't have to go through what I did. Now, there's been a little bit of press recently about these bad practices, and we've been able to see crap venues and the unpleasants share their takes on situations. And first up, in an article by The Stage, See Venues said, "It took volunteer safety seriously, and it does offer individuals finishing late a safe way of getting home." See Venues said it had developed its programme with Volunteer Edinburgh and it saw cultural volunteering as beneficial for both volunteers and society. "Our volunteer programme is reviewed for each festival and we are always seeking to improve it and to make participation more meaningful and beneficial for volunteers," the spokesman said. Now, we know that See Venues knows this isn't true because they have been sued for maltreatment for these volunteer positions, which have stayed the same year on year on year, but despite this, they keep doing it. How about the unpleasants? Well, in the same article they say, the company stressed that volunteers work alongside paid staff and do not run the venues. Pleasance director Anthony Alderson described volunteers as being at the very heart of our charity, with many returning year on year. To lose the opportunity for people to volunteer would in my mind be a great loss to the festival. While it is important to root out bad practice, we must celebrate the volunteer community and those who generously give their time, he said. How about you celebrate them, Anthony, by paying them a living wage? If volunteers are working alongside paid staff, why are they also not being paid? This doesn't answer anything to do with the safety concerns raised by the stories we've heard today. Now, I think people often think I am anti-volunteering. Absolutely not. I have volunteered for arts organisations and they have genuinely rewarding and challenging roles which have helped for me both professionally and personally. However, these organisations are asking volunteers to work, as we heard, 70 to 80 hours a week. If you are employed, you are protected by law to be contracted no more than 48 hours in a week, with a minimum 11 hours between working shifts. Why is the same not being applied to volunteers? I would suggest in the cases of the unpleasant and crap venues, it's because they can take advantage of and milk these unpaid workers for everything they have got with little legal repercussion. Finally, let's explore the response from the Fringe Society, which was released in The Stage this week. The head of the Fringe states in the article, "Where any serious breaches of workers' rights are reported, the Fringe Society will always investigate it fully. If any instance of bad practice occurs during the festival, we strongly urge workers to report this directly to us via our purpose-built system." Here's the thing. I have trawled the website for hours now and have been unable to find the system. Furthermore, when I asked some of the people who have shared their stories with us today about the system, they said they didn't know it existed or what role the Fringe Society had during the festival. And of course this means that a system which is impossible to find and unknown by workers is effectively redundant, but also it is placing the burden on those experiencing bad working practices to do something about it, not the organisations themselves. They continue. We have clear guidelines on working conditions for employees and best practice for volunteers, developed in consultation with BEC2, Volunteer Edinburgh and Equity. We ask that fringe companies and venues subscribe to these guidelines. So again, I have trawled their website looking for these guidelines, and I found the Fringe BEC2 Worker Employment Guidelines, which were written in 2019, which give absolutely zero information about legal working hours, contract expectations, breaks, what good practice looks like. It is effectively a document which says, look at these websites, we suggest you pay people. The volunteer document is just a page and a half long, and again gives no information on hours, expectations, good practice, where volunteers can make complaints of bad practice, just links to other websites. Anyway, the Fringe Society continues. In 2017, we commissioned an independent survey of fringe workers with the aim of developing a more detailed picture of the working lives of the many individuals that make the festival happen each year. A total of 497 people took part from 60 different organisations, representing the largest survey into working conditions ever undertaken at the Fringe. It was encouraging to hear that 90% of respondents would choose to work at the Fringe again, and that 83% were satisfied or very satisfied with their overall Fringe experience. So I looked at this survey. There's no information about the makeup of the people who took part, so we can't tell where the information has come from really, but the alarming thing is that 12% of respondents said they had experienced poor work practice or discrimination, and a further 9% said that they had seen it happen to others. If we scale that number up to the thousands of workers at the festival every year, that's literally hundreds of people experiencing discrimination and poor working conditions every year. 30% said they were not made aware of their legal working requirements or support available, and here the Fringe have just lied. 90% did not say they would work at the Fringe again, 75% did. 25% said no. Here we can clearly see the Fringe Society working hard to cover up their knowledge of bad working conditions, but what I want to focus on is this. The Fringe Society state, this is the first time there have been widespread conversations and we're not shying away. This is, to be frank, bullshit. In 2019, the same director of the festival said that calls for fair pay and working conditions by activists was a threat to the event, saying their calls were hyperbole. But frustratingly, in the article this week, the same director says, we want to take this moment to ask for understanding as we work towards this. It has been an extraordinarily difficult 2 years. So many of those who create work and make the Fringe great have either lost their livelihoods or are carrying huge loans and debts. The Fringe is not publicly funded, and our artists, venues and companies have been hit extremely hard. Here's the thing, I don't want to engage in some horrible game of top trumps of trauma, but the Fringe itself has had millions in subsidy as well as 0% loans from the Scottish Government, more than any arts organisation in Scotland, and whilst I genuinely hope that the work gets done and conditions improve, the same organisations we've heard stories about today are already recruiting in ways which will ensure their workers are exploited in this year's festival. The audacity of the Fringe Society asking for understanding after gaslighting and actively working against fair pay activists for years is exhausting. Okay, that's it for today, but more information will be coming in the next couple of weeks. I have stories from other venues such as Underbelly and the Gilded Balloon to share, and I would like to take a moment to thank those of you who have been open about your terrible and at times traumatic experiences. I am going to include a list of organisations you may want to reach out to if you were impacted by Sam's story in particular within the Twitter thread and below the YouTube video. Please do reach out with any stories you'd like to share, because if you've seen it, I'll share it, and together we'll sort it.